project on human trafficking, modern day slavery. So, by definition, human trafficking is the subjection of children, women, and men to force, fraud, or coercion for the purpose of commercial exploitation or forced labor. So, this can include prostitution, pornography, forced marriage, sex tourism, as well as labor for domestic service, factory or construction work, or migrant farming. So basically, anyone can be trafficked regardless of their class, education, gender, or age. And this happens in both third world countries and first world countries. And we got our definition from the United Nations International Children's Emergency Funds.
Human trafficking versus slavery. Slavery is the subjection of individuals to work, prostitution, or child soldiers, which is similar to human trafficking. Human trafficking also subjects people to work or prostitution, but it does not focus on race, although most targets are women and children. Slavery was more focused on race and accentuating the fact that one race was superior than the other by subjecting people to hard labor. Their labor was a slave's life, whereas trafficking is force. Trafficking, some people may already have jobs or a place to live, but they are taken out of their life into trafficking. Most targets are women and children for trafficking, but slavery focused a lot on men and children since they can do more hard labor than women, apparently on those days. Slaves were also super expensive back then, paying hundreds or even thousands of dollars because slaves were considered investments. How much you spent money on your slave reflected how much work you would get done. The cost of a modern day slave today is about $100 or even cheaper. The difference in price ratio is because trafficking victims are not chosen based on skill or physical capabilities like slaves were. It is easy to find another or lure another victim for free. How does human trafficking work? There are two types of trafficking. Labor trafficking is forcing someone to work, which occurs in places like restaurants, bars, hotels, farms, traveling sales crews. Sex trafficking, deceiving someone into exploitation for profit. And this occurs in places like hotels, strip clubs, escort, and massage services on the streets or on the internet. I
I,
get
Again, it's important to realize that anyone can be trafficked. In our textbook, it says that child labor is prevalent in third world countries, but it still happens in first world nations like ours. So that's something to keep in mind. Most victims are lured through incentives or kidnapping. Incentives could be wealth, fame, new life, or traveling, basically focusing on individuals who are not content with their life. So doesn't necessarily mean the person has to be poor. There was a case of this 14-year-old who actually was trafficked because she wanted to work. Her parents were well off, but she wanted to make her own money. So since obviously there aren't a lot of jobs for 14-year-olds, she saw an ad and she took the chance, but she ended up being trafficked anyway. Um, so, the most prevalent way victims are lured is through the internet. This is because once someone puts up an ad on the internet, it could be taken down right away, so there's no traces, even if you report it to the police. Same thing with telephones. If you ask someone to call a phone for a job, the phone number can be disconnected right away. So, how can we end trafficking? Um, oh, wait, wrong one. Trafficking in California.
There are 1,363 cases reported as of December 31, 2016, making it the highest rate reported in the US, with Texas following 670 cases reported. These two states are international travel hubs with large immigrant population to be exploited. These are the numbers for cases reported. Imagine how many people out there are still trafficked and cannot escape, or victims are afraid to report it. At least 31 cases reported in the Bay Area.
So, two examples of those cases. Many people have heard of the one with the Uber driver who was, I think, in Oakland. He was able to save this girl who he saw was being sex trafficked with these two female pimps. And so he waited for them to go inside the hotel and then he reported to the police and they were able to catch him. The other one was this man in San Jose whose neighbors was skeptical of him, and because of that one neighbor, they found out the police went in undercover and they found out that he converted his house into a brothel. And so, yeah. And one of the many claims also is that LA is the epicenter of the trafficking industry. Many are promised fame and money, and they mask it with the Hollywood flair in order to attract more victims. So, how can we end human trafficking? One way is through fair trade products. So, fair trade products are made from labor where there are fair wages and reasonable working conditions. So, there's places like here in the Bay Area, like Trader Joe's, they provide that. These are the symbols here. These are just the common six symbols that you see on products. So, they could be on like tea, coffee, electronic products. This mostly focuses on labor trafficking. So, by using fair trade products or asking your local market to start selling fair trade products, it's to ensure that the goods being sold are not from labor trafficking, not just in the US, but also worldwide. And if they don't provide it at your market, you should go ask them. They should be selling products like that because, yeah. And then it's also good to focus on what the government has done for human trafficking. The first one is the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000. Well, it was enacted in 2000. Basically, it's just a federal law that helps victims get legal help or medical help. Before this law, there was no federal law that protected victims of trafficking or to prosecute their traffickers. So this was like the big thing for human trafficking back then. Also, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act of 2003. This is when the Bush administration authorized more than $200 million to combat human trafficking. Um, they renewed the original one and they also added more programs such as more to help foreign nationals because obviously um, getting legal help is really hard when you aren't a US citizen. But because of this act, the Department of Health and Human Services also enabled foreign nationals to receive federally funded benefits and services. And this also helped them with their um, immigration statuses. And then in 2011, there was the California enacted the Transparency in Supply Chains Act. This law basically required certain retailers to disclose their efforts to eradicate slavery and human trafficking from their supply chains to ensure that the products that they're selling aren't made from labor trafficking. Um, and then there's also the Coalition to Abolish Slavery and Trafficking. This organization works to assist people who are trafficked for the purpose of basically forced labor and practices in that. There's various grassroots organizations throughout California. There is some in San Francisco. You would have to call hotline or certain areas if you want to get involved, but there's various organizations you can join and to ensure that the government continues their federal funding towards victims. You can also sign petitions and call your local state legislators. Another way to make sure that human trafficking doesn't prevail is to identify human trafficking. These are certain questions to ask yourself when identifying someone who may be trafficked. So, are there bruises or are there signs of physical abuse? Are there signs of psychological abuse? Is the person submissive or fearful? Is the person deprived of food, sleep, or other necessities? So, you can see if they're really fatigued. Is the person allowed to be alone in public? If you see someone being hovered by another person, you could tell that if they're afraid to go and call their friends freely, um, that's a huge sign of human trafficking because anyone who isn't trafficked should be able to call anyone when they need to. Other questions to ask are: does a minor appear to be in a relationship with a much older person? Does the person fear his or her employer? Again, anyone can be trafficked, so this can even happen in the workplace. Can the person leave when they want? So basically, can this person go anywhere without having this one person or group of people hover over them? Or does the person know his or her own address? Um, Statistics say that the most of the time that they find people who are trafficked is because they don't know their own address, they don't know where they are, and they don't have identification on them. So obviously, if someone is unaware of where they are, you can tell right away that they're not from there, or they're confused. And most importantly, are there inconsistencies with the person's stories? If their stories aren't adding up, you can tell that they're lying and they're trying to hide something. And most importantly, if you know someone who may be trafficked or is potentially trafficking, you could call the national toll free 24-hour hotline or text the hotline as well. You can even give out the info to people that you think are trafficked so you don't impede on their private life, just in case they're fearful that they may be attacked if they find out that they're trying to contact authorities. Okay. And I hope you guys learned something from this. Thanks.